King Charles I had his head chopped off in a public execution on the 30th of January 1649. This followed a trial by the majority of the House of Commons. Members of the House of Lords in the UK did not participate in the trial and lamented the execution. Nevertheless, it went ahead. When the executioner had completed his work, the king's head was allowed to fall from the scaffold to the ground, and many people cut locks of the king's hair or dipped their handkerchiefs in the blood around his severed neck as souvenirs or as relics. The supporters of the parliamentarians were pleased. The tyrant was now dead. The supporters of the king were devastated that God's regent on earth had been killed. Historians still debate these two positions. There is some agreement that Charles was neither a good martyr nor a good king. He was caught clinging to a medieval worldview, and Parliament wanted a new world where power was more shared. Even in our own cathedral, we have an old banner that's in the stairs going downstairs, and it comes from a little church that was dedicated to King Charles as a martyr, and it's worth having a look at. It's a nice banner. But I always like to think he was not much of a king and not much of a martyr either. Who was right? Parliament or the king? Any discussion, and historians are still discussing this matter, will involve beliefs, truth, and a search for clarity of knowledge. There's no easy answer to the question, who was right? Passionate supporters of the king and the equally passionate supporters of the parliamentarians are both examples of people engaged in what philosophers will call epistemological hubris. What a great line that is, epistemological hubris. Both groups believed they were right. Both were sure that they were serving the truth. Both believed that their knowledge and understanding was full and correct. From our perspective, we might be able to see that both groups had a somewhat exaggerated belief in their knowledge and in their expertise to discern the truth. Both groups displayed an unwarranted certainty in the righteousness of their own position, and neither side was willing to acknowledge their own limitations in reaching the conclusion of their dispute. The conclusion was, of course, disastrous for the king. It was also pretty disastrous for the people of England, who then struggled under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell for more than a decade. Epistemological hubris. What a great line. Hubris is pride, exaggerated confidence, thinking we have complete control of what's true. And epistemological is to do with what is true knowledge. How do we understand what's going on around us? How do we make sense of our world? How does our knowledge fit? Our beliefs and our knowledge and our hopes, how do they all sit together? It's easy for us in this example to see the epistemological hubris of both the king and the parliamentarians. It's not hard to see proud or arrogant belief in ideas when we look at an historical event, like the execution of King Charles I. It's not so comfortable when we search our contemporary world or even our own lives for examples of epistemological hubris. The tragic and devastating conflict between the State of Israel and the Palestinian residents of the Gaza Strip demonstrates the consequences of epistemological hubris, with all its terrifying results every evening displayed on our TV screens. The Hamas terrorists and the Israeli government both show exaggerated self-belief, an unwarranted certainty in their own strategy, a commitment to their version of truth, and a refusal to acknowledge limitations in their understanding of meaning and reality. For most Israelis, this means living in fear, uncertainty and anger. And for the Palestinian people, it means more than 60,000 deaths and the obliteration of thousands of homes and probably too of hope for a peaceful coexistence. Epistemological hubris, therefore, is not just a fancy idea or a cute set of words. It helps us to understand how such inhuman devastation is possible, and the rhetoric on both sides is appalling. Within the wider church, the same principles are at work. We can see that easily in others, say the exclusive brethren or the North American Amish communities, living apart from the rest of the world because of their perception of knowledge, truth and belief from their own narrow perspective. Those same failures are devastatingly present in our own church too. The recent announcement of Bishop Sarah Mullally as the next Archbishop of Canterbury brought the usual flurry of commentary from those conservatives opposed to women as leaders or those who disagree with her support for blessing of same-sex marriages. The Primate of Rwanda and the current chair of GAFCON called on her to repent. Likewise, more liberal-style Anglicans have decried her as an administrator, not a priest, not a scholar, not well experienced in the church. Where do we find belief and truth and sound knowledge when we are all such experts in our own epistemological hubris? Even in our families, we fall into the same trap. We can see the faults of others very clearly, and this reinforces our own certainty. This is not a Christ-like way to build our families, our church congregations, or healthy communities of diversity. Othering, the natural consequence of epistemological hubris, seems to me to be always lurking on the horizon, and especially so when our own sense of certainty or security or prosperity might be under threat. Sadly, we often treat the Holy Scriptures the same way. Those who don't share our way of reading and understanding the Scriptures are suspect or revisionists or enemies of the true gospel. Preaching can easily turn into dogmatic teaching of my way to respond to the biblical narrative. Competing theological traditions also other their opponents, rather than seeking a more godly way to understand how truth is perceived and experienced differently by different people. For those of us who seek to follow Jesus, we don't have to search very far to find his response to epistemological hubris. His most devastating criticism in the Gospels is directed to the scribes and Pharisees, those who claim to be God's chosen ones, who define themselves by their religious purity and cannot see the work of God anywhere but in their own closed world view. Jesus himself defies this othering and breaks the power of epistemological hubris by reaching towards widows and fatherless, healing an unclean suffering woman, dining with the short despised tax gatherer, speaking frankly with a Samaritan woman, raising the putrefying body of his friend from the grave, embracing a condemned criminal as they share their death, forgiving those who've participated in his crucifixion. The list is long. Othering is not part of Jesus' program. Theologians have talked for a long time about original sin, and perhaps an appreciation of epistemological hubris helps us to grasp what this deep-seated resistance to the ways of God actually means. Perhaps too we might begin to see God's invitation to be co-workers and friends sets us free from the need to be right in order to be something more like the full measure of the stature of Christ. We are not absolved from thinking deeply, from searching thoroughly, from arguing properly, from listening expectantly, from participating fully. But we are invited to hold our positions lightly, to try to understand those with whom we most deeply disagree, and to commit ourselves to love those whom we find it most easy to other. Now, some personal reflections. On October the 3rd next year, I'll celebrate my 70th birthday, and according to the Acts of the Diocese, I'm required to relinquish my office as 10th Bishop of Ballarat on that date. As long as my health continues to improve, I intend to continue until then, although I do have an accumulated swag of long service leave. I hope to be a voice for the Diocese still at the General Synod to be held in Melbourne in 2026, and to continue to serve on the Standing Committee of General Synod, the Executive of the Standing Committee, the Appellate Tribunal of our Church, and participate in the Bishops' meetings until then. I'm required to give 6 months' notice of my intention to vacate the see, and that will be the trigger for the Board of Electors of the Bishop to begin their work. The last 18 months have been very difficult for me, and there have been some negative consequences not just for me, but for the diocese as well. I'm grateful for those who've tried to cover the gap left by my absence. I'm very grateful for the work of the registrars, Peter Jarvis, and more recently Tony Mould. I'm grateful to the Vicar General, Bishop Scott, and to the Archdeacon of Ballarat, Father Michael, who've carried extra burdens during this time. Father Michael O'Brien came to hospital at least twice a week for the whole 9 months I was in care, and said evening prayer with me on every day that he came. One day he even endured the wrath of the woman who was in the bed next to me, who said he should shut up and stop all that bloody religious nonsense. This was extremely important to me, as were the prayers and cares offered by so many people around the diocese. Every 3 weeks I had a card from an elderly couple at Hamilton that was there to encourage me and to remind me that although I wasn't able to see them or to be seen by them, they were praying for me. Kath Zala has been a great personal support to me. I'm also particularly grateful to Jill Gale for her care. During the whole time I was in hospital, most of my stipend continued to be paid from our stipend insurance. Thank heavens. And since my partial return to work in February, the insurers have continued to pay 50% of the stipend. That has just concluded. The Must Trust provided me with a wheelchair-friendly unit in the Must Homes in Berkeley Street, where I've been very happy and comfortable and where there are no stairs. This has been at no cost to the see or to the diocese. I hope to return to Bishop's House in Soldiers Hill around Christmas time. Pivotal in caring for my material needs and covering many of the gaps in our diocesan administration during this difficult time has been the Chair of Property and Finance, Mr. Mike Robbins. is wise, practical, and more tenacious than a Jack Russell Terrier. We all owe Mike an enormous debt of gratitude. Finances. You will see from the financial statements that the diocesan financial situation has been and continues to be very difficult. Primarily, this has been because of the cost of civil claims and redress claims concerning abuse survivors within our organisation. At present, since 2015, we've paid out just under $6 million in claims to people who have come to us. That's a combination of both civil claimants and the National Redress Scheme. We anticipate at least another $1 to $1.5 million remains to be paid to those claimants of whom we are aware. We cannot know if there might be more cases that emerge, although I remain hopeful that the worst of this wave is coming to an end. Most of the claims are more than 20 or 30 years old, and there are very significant legal costs involved in settling every single case. I've been at pains over the last few years to shield the diocese in general from this information because it is very disturbing. It's unsettling, and also because some of those who've been offenders have been people who've been much admired and loved around the diocesan community. This may have been a mistake by me. Maybe I should have been very clear from the very first cases what was going on. But it is important that you understand that we are dealing with very large amounts of money, and that you understand too the precariousness of our finances and the need for the rationalisation of properties. As far as possible, the burden of these calls on our resources are shared across the diocese. Some people, like the small and faithful congregation at Sebastopol, have sacrificed everything, their much-loved parish and their community, to assist us to meet our significant obligations. Most places will be asked to share at some stage some of that burden. The diocese no longer owns any properties. They've all been sold. The diocese has planned for this situation since 2015, when we had an actuarial report commissioned that suggested our total liability would be $7.5 million. I thought at the time that was a bit high, but it's actually a pretty accurate assessment. When you think that the Diocese of Melbourne is exactly 10 times the size of Adelaide, and that they have paid out exactly 10 times the amount of money we have, the actuaries knew what they were doing. We accumulated funds as much as possible every year as soon as we realised this tsunami was approaching. But we've now used all that money, and we've disposed of all the properties in Ballarat and one in Warrnambool because the built-up reserves were exhausted. You may have heard that the Diocese of North Queensland has gone into receivership because it's unable to meet its obligations under the National Redress Scheme. One consequence of that might be that every diocese will be levied further to cover the North Queensland debt. I don't think this situation will arise here in Ballarat, but we are less financially secure than we were when I came to the diocese. We have endeavoured to preserve parish funds, and therefore parish incomes have been protected as much as possible. But there will be some reduction in parish incomes as a result of the sale of shares and properties to meet our obligations. Sometimes, in fact, too often, complaints come from parishioners and clergy and they often come to me, that the diocese is like a voracious drain on the local church. Nothing could be further from the truth than this. It's very demoralising for the staff at church office and to the Property and Finance Committee to hear this. They are and have been working very hard for 10 years, making very difficult decisions in order to protect the parishes. For example, we continue to run the ministry fund, which has not been impacted by the claims at all. This fund pays 25% of the stipend of every parish priest, so the parochial costs are 25% less than they would be otherwise. A very small number, I think it's 3, of wealthier parishes pay more to the fund than they receive back. But for the most part, every parish benefits very significantly from this fund. It's only because it's been well managed and protected that the incomes continue. We continue to pay more on parish investments than is available through any of the big banks. The return on parish investments in our pooled diocesan funds is always higher than what is available commercially, because we're not seeking to make a profit for shareholders. A very small percentage of income from our pooled funds is paid to the diocese for the management of those funds and for the work of their distribution in an appropriate share. In all these financial matters, as well as with organisational and structural questions, the underlying principle is to make as significant payment to the parishes as we possibly can. The Property and Finance Committee and the Bishop in Council always aim to serve the parishes first. Without parishes and active congregations, the diocese means nothing and would have no reason for its existence. It's important that those of you who are members of local parish councils help your parish council understand this principle. Ministry matters. It's unlikely that there will ever be a return to the situation where most parishes have a full-time, stipendiary, seminary-trained parish priest who moves from parish to parish over a lifetime of ministry. Unfortunately, this is a natural consequence of several factors. First, very few young men and women are offering as candidates for ordination with the intention of spending their lives in the service of God through parish ministry. Most of the people I have ordained in my 25 years as a bishop have been over 30, and many have been second career clergy, beginning in midlife. There are exceptions, of course, but when I was ordained in 1985, 4 of the 5 candidates were under 30, and this was normal. But in urban dioceses as well as regional and rural areas, the age of candidates has gone up steeply. And some who come down this path are not seeking full-time or fully paid employment in the church. Secondly, the capacity for parishes to sustain a full-time priest has diminished. There may be many reasons for this, but one is certainly connected with diminishing congregations and subsequent financial stress locally. The abuse crisis, and I also suspect the COVID years, have damaged our capacity in moral as well as financial areas. Though I am interested to note that in our own diocese, as well as some of the other rural and urban dioceses, there seems to be a resurgence in church attendance following those difficult years, 2020, 2021. There is a direct link too between the tenacity and quality of the clergy, the clerical capacity to be creative and energetic, and the authentic connection between priest and people that impacts directly on the health and attractiveness of individual parishes and of the ministry as a way to spend your life. Too often, some clerics move on, as if they still, in the famous words of U2, still haven't found what they're looking for. I'll say something more about that in the sermon tomorrow. New clergy need to be well formed in their priestly life. This is not about academic achievements, but about loving God, loving God's people, and loving the life of being a parish cleric. Like faith, these things are caught rather than taught, and yet we still seem over-obsessed with theological degrees, and we have very little capacity to form clergy. Luckily, we have some great priests in this diocese. Some of them are parish priests. Others serve in ordained local ministry as non-stipendiary priests and as retired or self-sustaining clergy. This mix is likely to be the norm as we move into the future. It makes the work of discernment and formation for ministry part of the ongoing life of every parish community. It also sets us free from just one straitjacket way of experiencing priestly or diaconal ministry, so that vocations to ordained life can be explored in a variety of contexts. It also, of course, opens up all sorts of ministry to committed lay people. I do not believe that we will ever not need full-time, professional, well-trained, peripatetic clergy. But there will be much more variety ahead, and the professional clergy will have to change their role from being doers of ministry to being facilitators and enablers of the ministry of other people. A year of anniversaries. This is the 150th year since the foundation of our diocese in 1875. I'm pleased that the diocesan prayer and hymn have been used in many places, and that the Stretch Sunday suggestion that each congregation should enjoy a colonial meal was met with great fun, but frankly limited participation. I think the parish of Springmount had a really posh morning tea in the sun. It didn't look very colonial, but they had a great celebration. The cathedral's offering for the 150th celebrations was a wonderful choral Eucharist, attended by about 200 people from across Ballarat and further afield. Various local events have carried a 150th logo. I note that the parish of Camperdown and Holy Apostles has labelled its fourth upcoming spring fair as the 150th spring fair. And the grammar schools had a whole senior school Eucharist to celebrate. The final event will be a diocesan mass at Christchurch, Hamilton in November on the Feast of Christ the King. I encourage every congregation to come. There's been remarkable resistance to the suggestion, but everyone parish should at least send some people, and perhaps a parish or congregational banner. The clergy will celebrate Holy Communion, and then there'll be a picnic together in the Botanic Gardens. Bring your own food and folding chair. If the weather is inclement, Mona Vale College has offered us a large, dry, comfortable hall at the school with plenty of parking. I'm reliably informed that a coffee van or two have been engaged. To go will require some commitment from people, but it's not that hard to carpool or hire a minibus or even a big bus. It's a unique opportunity for us to celebrate together all the good things about the Diocese of Ballarat and the joy of serving God in this wonderful part of creation. In order to remind ourselves that we are much more blessed than we think we are, I have invited and continue to invite every person in our diocese to contribute 150 of something for our 150th celebration. What that 150 is will be up to you to choose. 150 10-cent coins, 150 $100 notes, 150 small bars of gold, 150 bitcoins, perhaps 150 cakes made and served at morning tea for a small fee, perhaps 100 bottles of homemade sauce or green tomato chutney, or perhaps a periwinkle necklace with 150 shells. The idea is that everyone is capable of giving 150 of something to say thanks to God for giving us 150 years here in the Diocese of Ballarat. The money that we raise will go to renovate student houses at Newton College in Papua New Guinea, part of the Madawa Institute. Each house will get a new kitchen sink and a septic tank. These are things we take for granted. So let's think and act creatively to share 150 for our 150th. Gifts can be brought to the service at Hamilton to be part of the offertory. This year is also the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Girls Friendly Society. Here in Ballarat and in most places in Australia, there are no longer girls' groups called GFS. But here, former GFS members enjoy belonging to a Townsend group which meets for fellowship and supports projects that continue to help women and girls achieve their potential. You'll see something in Natalie Stevens' written report to Synod of the great work that GFS still do in our midst. Next year will be the 150th anniversary of the founding of Mothers' Union. Clearly 150 years ago in England, something was stirring, maybe even the Spirit of God. In November, we'll mark 50 years since the foundation of the community of St Mark, which has become the Abbey of Our Lady and St Mark at Camperdown. This is a great opportunity to celebrate all that has been and to seek God's guidance for the future of religious life in the Benedictine tradition at the Abbey. There have been many local anniversaries and celebrations too. I wanted to mention just one. The little church at Birregurra has been falling to disrepair for some time. The late Dr. Trevor Hodson was determined to work towards its renovation, and when he received a diagnosis that his life was about to end, he immediately arranged to provide enough funds to enable the renovation to happen, even though he was not there to see it. At the grand service of reopening, we began with a fanfare on brass instruments written especially for the event by his nephew and entitled the Birregurra Fanfare. It was not just a celebration of Trevor's generosity, but of the tenacity of God's people, even when they are few, to achieve great things and to give great thanks to God. The grammar school. The last 12 months have been very difficult for the school after revelations surfaced of inappropriate physical punishment and bullying of younger boys by older boys in one of the boarding houses. After a great deal of inquiry and many difficult legal wranglings, the school has changed some of the senior staff, some board members are changing, and new protective measures are in place to protect students from poor behaviour by other students. Adam Heath and the board have continued to lead the school with skill and sensitivity during some very difficult times. At my last visit to the school, I was really delighted to see that in spite of the terrible news that has been plaguing me and the boarders were getting ready for Sunday evening dinner with warmth and harmony and a great deal of fun. The reality is that most parents continue to value the school and its great contribution to their children's lives. I don't want to diminish the harm and discord that is part of the school and students' experience this year, but enrolments are higher than they have ever been. We were all saddened when the former long-serving chaplain, Father Peter Treloar, died earlier this year. His contribution to the diocese, to the wider church, but particularly to the lives of many, many students, cannot be overstated. I'm delighted that tomorrow, God willing, it's my intention that Deacon Keith Romanus will be ordained as a priesthood, and he will continue to serve the school with love, good humour and sensitivity. Nurture of believers. At the local parish level, there are many opportunities for learning and growth in faith. In fact, it's one of the most important functions of a parish community. We are particularly blessed in this diocese to have a great ministry development committee led by Robin Shackle. The Ministry Development Committee seeks to provide resources to assist local congregations to grow in faith and knowledge as well as in fellowship. The MDC sponsors Lenten studies at other times of the year, quiet days, has produced some good generic material for children who may be regular or irregular visitors at church, and has produced great resources for encouraging prayer and continuing resources to encourage Bible reading. This year, for the second time, the Diocese of Gippsland joined us in the production of the June Bible Reading Challenge. The Reverend Grant Bullen, who worships here at the Cathedral, has explored the mystic heritage of Christianity during several Saturday seminars. The Reverend Dr. Mark Garner has led so many Bible studies I can never keep up with them all. He does that both in person and online. In September, he was invited and flown to Perth to speak at their clergy conference, and he based his addresses around the booklet produced and first used here to celebrate the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed. Dr. Alex Banks has pioneered an evening service here in Ballarat twice a month that aims to capture the attention of Anglicans who have drifted away or those who are looking for a simple yet theologically strong worship experience. There is no better way to nourish people in the faith than to encourage opportunities for them to pray together. If you or your parish or your priest have forgotten about the daily prayer of the church, perhaps you might take the lead in committing to saying morning or evening prayer with some regularity. This next paragraph is entitled Our Catholicity, and there will be some members of the Synod who think, oh, he's always going on about this. The Chancellor, who is well known for his championing of the Reformation and its importance for Anglicans, showed me a document recently that talked about the difference between the Catholicity and the reformed nature of the Anglican Communion. And it came to a good solution. You might talk to him about it during a break. But I think that the Catholic heritage of this diocese isn't just about the stuff we do in church. It's about the way we are as God's people. And I think that's true for all those who are seeking to be followers of Jesus, no matter what they do in church. This diocese has a strong tradition of holding to a Catholic expression of Anglicanism. In many parts of the Australian Church, this sacramental and liturgical way of being the Church is under threat. Partly this is because of a gin and lace caricature that many Anglo-Catholics have encouraged and celebrated. The Catholic tradition within Anglicanism found fresh expression in the Oxford movement in the mid-19th century in the UK. It was much less concerned with liturgical frippery than most people realise. Newman and Pusey and the rest of them wanted to recapture the nature of the early church, the strong sacramentalism that was part of the ancient church liturgies. And they wanted to equip ordinary people with a strength and certainty of faith and confidence that could challenge injustice and build better lives. This Catholicity was most powerfully seen in those missionary bishops and missionary bush brothers in Australia who came from what we might say a high church tradition, but who lived out their lives in service and in faithfulness. This Catholicity in serving God by serving others and recognising the incarnational principles that are at the heart of Jesus' life, death and resurrection are at the heart of a modern expression of Catholicity. I don't want to lose the beauty of worship, the otherness of God, or the transcendence that sometimes comes in good music and great liturgy. But I want us to celebrate all this with knowledge and deliberate intention that we want people to deepen their relationship with God. And I want every church in the diocese to have a serving heart, a deep reverence for creation, and a profound gratitude for God's action in and through Jesus Christ. I long for our church to be a place where epistemological hubris has no place and where deep humility is our everyday experience of each other. I'm grateful to those who serve our common life. The Registrar and his predecessor, Peter, who served us well for over 10 years. To John Russell, who now carries the lofty title of Assistant Registrar. To Catherine, our new bookkeeper, and her predecessor, Cheryl. Mike Robbins, the Chair of Property and Finance, and the team who work with him, high-powered people who give time worth a great deal to help our diocese. The Dean, the Very Reverend Michael Davies, the Archdeacon of Ballarat, the Venerable Michael O'Brien. I particularly want to thank our Assistant Bishop, the Right Reverend Scott Lowry, who also serves as Vicar General, and who managed just after being made a bishop to have a brain tumour removed. The old joke, of course, is that when somebody's made a bishop, their spine is removed. Scott still has a spine, I think. I'm grateful to Sally MacArthur-Clyde, our advocate, and to my Chancellor, Charles Gunst. The tradition is that when the bishop changes, so too does the Chancellor. So this may well be Charles's last appearance at Synod. He's indicated he hopes that might be the case, but no promises. I'm very grateful to Michael Iacovino, a Director of Professional Standards. If you have had nothing to do with him, consider yourself very blessed. And we are well served by our new Safeguarding Officer, Kate Schneering. I haven't put on my list Chris Keast, my chaplain, but he does a great deal for me and helps smooth rocky paths so that life can be pretty good. So thank you, Chris. I want to thank too all those who serve on the various committees of the diocese and especially members of Bishop in Council. This will be the last synod at which I preside, and so I want to give thanks to the people of this wonderful Diocese of Ballarat and my previous Diocese of Weatherill for giving me the immense privilege and joy of serving you and God as a bishop for more than 25 years. Let me add some concluding remarks. I do not believe that every opinion is equally valid or that truth is entirely relative, but I am sure that our future can only be enhanced and more Christ-oriented when we accept the provisionality of all our knowledge, beliefs and sense of truth. Oliver Cromwell, the leader of those who chopped off Charles I's head, was not known as a modernist or a flaky liberal, that term didn't even exist then of course, or a relativist. But even of him, it is recorded that he wrote to the Presbyterian Assembly of the Church of Scotland, asking them to be careful of absolutes, that is, of epistemological hubris. Cromwell, this is Oliver, not Thomas, wrote, "Is it therefore infallibly agreeable to the word of God, all that you say? I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken." Jewish mathematician Jacob Bronowski had a big influence on me when I was a young man through a television program called The Ascent of Man. And at the end of one of those television programs, Bronowski was standing in the paddocks outside Auschwitz, and he picked up handfuls of mud and let the mud squeeze through his fingers and reminded those who were viewing that this is where the ashes of millions of Jews had been scattered after their bodies had been burnt. Bronowski says, as he stands with the mud squeezing out of his hands, "I owe it as a human being to the many members of my family who died here to stand as a survivor and a witness. We have to cure ourselves of the itch for absolute knowledge and power. We have to close the distance between the push-button order and the human act. We have to touch people. May God bless us all with such humility and grace." Thank you.